Hello, everybody. I'm going to make a little bit on the intense damage and the creation of illogical or untruthfulness in a political discourse or sociological discourse that polarization creates in popular cultural intelligence and everyday arguments that we're seeing today in politics and civil issues. Polarization generates problems. So I'm going to explain first, before I get into it, and give some examples. Something that's sort of mathematical, but I'm not very studied in math, and so this would probably be easy to explain for a mathematician. Um, or a programmer or somebody, some mathematical engineer or someone. But I was just thinking about this. How can I make an example that is simple to understand? And it just occurred to me. Basically, the concept is if you apply in a sense forcefully, if you are become obstinate and or don't realize that that's what you're doing, polarization, division, binary division of something that by nature is a whole, you will create a kind of a perverted, distorted, impossible tug of war of something that is not meant to be separated, and therefore will create two resulting renditions of error and untruthfulness, things that are just not true, because you're trying to force them to be part of one side or the other side, and that is not the nature of what you're talking about. What you're talking about is something whole and entire, a cell or an organism, a collective or a single living form. And by trying to separate it, you create problems on both sides. By nature, some things will seem to be all right and will be truthful on both sides, and some things will be wrong and inapplicable really to any form of division on both sides as well. So the best way to understand this kind of mathematical sort of predicament that we're creating for ourselves today a lot lately is imagine that you have a tribe or a small village composed of maybe 3 or 4 families, and in that collective of people who are joined by so many things, by generations of living together in the same valley, growing up knowing each other, growing up practicing the same cultures, or to the point where there is really no division. It's a single organism, you could say, or even if you just imagine one extended family, and then all of a sudden you come to this situation and say, okay, we need to understand something. We need to understand. We need to resolve a problem. Um, that maybe could have to do with uh, I don't know, some people having more privileges or more advantages than other people, and we don't quite understand how it happens, and we start trying to label it and call it by the names of various forms of prejudice. We want to tackle this problem, and we want to apply an understanding, a logic to in analyzing it, so as with the intention of solving it, right? And we say, well, okay, let's see what seems to be a common denominator. It seems that people who are tall and kind of bodily strong um, seem to get more privilege and get away with things, are the first ones to get the best um, there is of something that needs to be shared among everybody. And while the guys that are don't seem to, a lot of them, be shorter. They seem to be short guys, short people. And the ones that seem to be having a better time are those that are taller, or maybe we want to say those that are redhead or blonde, or those that are dark haired are not. And we start thinking that we're identifying a way of categorizing that is really a human tendency of creating a binary, sort of a forward versus confrontation, a linear, format of thinking that the human brain has. Question and answer, forward, obstacle, resolve that obstacle so I can continue to go forward, and identify an enemy identify something that is name something or label something that is identifiable as what is opposing my forward advance. And so our brain has a tendency to, we've evolved in day and night, men and women, so many things that have influenced our evolution has made us predisposed to look for duality or polarization in order to solve problems. Our language, for example, is developed among more than one or two people, obviously, because you need someone to emanate a sound and someone to hear it, and then you need to agree. And so the development and the evolution of language is locked between, at the very least, two or more people, between the ear and the mouth. And so our brain tends to want to understand things by identifying and then prescribing. And therefore, there's always this tendency to split in two because of so many influences on our evolution. And so when we come to use our intelligent brain to try to make society better, our tendency is to kind of immediately create two camps. But what happens when we create these two camps? We're damaging, we're disintegrating something that is not, because life forms, the constitution of life forms and living organisms has nothing to do with polarity, because our brain is a centralized perceptor of existence. And so our brain evolved computing, you could say, absorbing from all our senses and our rational experience of collective experiences with animals and other living beings and human beings. And then all our senses, 5 or however many senses you want to, eyesight, smell, basically hearing and speaking, and all the forces that can concentrate in the self and in a single point. And the brain evolves in a way that we're far from understanding, processing all of this spherical evolution into its own path of its own singular evolutionary path. And so human beings and living beings are not by nature polarized or binary in their thinking, but we have this strong tendency we're not binary or polarized in our existential intelligent capacity, our cognizant capacity, but we have a strong tendency to default to, when applying our rationale and analysis, into trying to simplify it into a binary or polarized format of logic. So if you take this clan, this family, and you decide that you're going to fix this problem of social inequality, some form of social inequality going on, and the first thing you notice is that it must be tall versus short, and you say, okay, now we're going to fix this. We're going to say that all tall people need to yield so much time to accessing water, so that those shorter people, for some people are, for some reason, I mean, are less privileged, have more time, and can get themselves together, get it together to sort of access water equally as everyone else does. Okay, what's happening? I'm running out of time. I need to erase. I need to erase some videos, maybe in my cell phone. Oh, darn. Okay. I'll just keep going. Hope it doesn't cut me short. But anyways, when we look at the resulting, the result of applying these new rules or way of thinking about the clan, the tribe, what we find is immediately a whole lot of problems arise, because as it turns out, it wasn't just the fact that maybe some people respond to some being taller versus others being shorter. There were other factors. And when those other factors were not maybe personality factors, people that are just, there were, among the short people, there were those that were the best at collecting water or making it to become leaders or what have you. But when we applied the rigid separate categorization, what we did is we damaged cases that were the opposite in this new group, in this new category that we created. And so we instantly generate problems by splitting something that was not meant to be split, that already was designed and functioned in a collective way, that is simply too deeply embedded in how evolution made us through millions of years. And so we can't begin to understand that we applied a very primitive, in a sense, human intelligence, and thus ended up creating new problems that weren't there before. By not trusting nature, basically. So where do we see this? If you think back at, the idea of socialism, Marxism versus capitalism, maybe 100 years ago, traditionalism, let's say when it comes to sexuality, was pretty much the same. Our traditionalism, our views on sexuality and raising children, and seeing abortion as something bad, something that is going against nature, was pretty much common on both sides. Then, if you think about it, it was really the capitalistic-led European, Western, North American countries that started on progressive ideas to do with divorce or abortion, while the countries that were developing Marxism and socialism were very much more traditional. They weren't the ones that were talking about gender ideology. I mean, the left back then for a while, was more conservative than the right. And then as it progressed, we're now seeing that it seems to be suddenly, not just in the United States, but in the whole American continent, Western culture, it seems to be the left that we call woke or progressive, or exploring ideas of gender ideologies and new ways of looking at civil society that are very experimental. And so what we're seeing is the result of forcing this polarization on the comprehension of an integral humanity. Humanity is, we are what we will always be, in a sense, as we were designed by evolution. And so as society changes and we acquire new inventions and new ideas and we progress technologically, and through it we apply this cage of separating, of polarizing two political camps in a sort of symmetrical way. This math problem that I was referring to before, will have the effect of forcing and tugging and resulting in maybe something going from one side to the other because it doesn't fit one place or the other, or it changes and may seem to fit on one side. And then when we, but what I'm really wanting to get at, and was something, the reason that I wanted to make this video is that it seems to me that the socialist or the left kind of political philosophy or civil philosophy has got to do with addressing injustices, the things that the collective fairness, social equality, labor, things that are about the more human and neglected parts of society, equal wages, women were being treated, and so women, that was adopted, mistreated. Did I say mistreated? Treated, I said. Okay, anyways, mistreated, abused by male or in a certain segment of society behind closed doors. Women were not treated well, were second-class citizens, so forth. And so, yes, the idea of a more equalized, more fair and just society made that the feminist issue was adopted by the left, rightly so, because it is looking at its tendency is to look at the collective, and we do start the understanding of ourselves does start in the collective, not in the individual, which is kind of what we generally believe, that you need to first focus on the individual for the collective to be healthy or to get there in any collective sense. In reality, the individual will never be healthy unless the collective as a whole is working in a healthy way. And these two parts of social perception and social understanding of ourselves as a species are in our brain. There isn't a polarization because, like I said, the brain evolved eccentrically or concentrically from all that it absorbed through the moving experience of time in a sort of sphere that changes, matures, and moves forward in time, and then it ceases to exist. And that's really the form definition of our existential condition and the evolution of our brain. But, and so, oops, I just lost my train of thought. If you, oh, okay, yeah. So there isn't a polarized condition in the brain, but you could say that somehow the brain, from our intellectual analysis, from our limited linear intelligence analysis capacity, we could identify that there's two main areas that the brain evolved needing to be concerned with: the self, individual, the personal thriving, the survival of the individual, in a sense, prioritized to others, and also our sensible, logical, reasonable concern and awareness of the collective, which is also a part of all of many expressions in how the brain thinks that reflect there's that part too. We care about being accepted. It's important, it's fundamental. It's essential that we feel included and accepted. We are constantly bouncing off others as human beings. If too many people have something and we immediately, our brain immediately processes, wow, we were able to invent that, now we're all going to have it. And it turns out that only a few have it. There's a reaction immediately by the brain because we have also that part in our minds, an intelligent awareness of the collective, which often has to do with all that is eternally true. Like, for example, the toddler needs the parents around it all the time. You can't just put it in a room and come back every 8 hours to feed it. You have to nurture it and be with it and raise it and protect it, and a whole lot of things that will always be true, even though. So this is where we go to, apparently there seems to be a kind of relationship between these two parts of the brain, the collective most fundamentally true, ultimately the most important thing, and yet the one that seems to be the loudest and wants to lead is our individual analysis and our inventing mind, the one that comes up with new systems and so forth, is primarily, mostly directly, if not entirely directed by the individualist brain. Um, but we always have an intelligent reference, especially when it comes to knowing what is true or wisdom, things that nobody taught us, and yet we're able to talk about them. We somehow know it's true. All this part of our intelligence comes from the collective part of our intelligence, of our mind. And it seems that the political evolution of the West has, in a sense, expressed these two areas. And if you look at some of the fundamental concepts in these two political camps, you kind of see that expression. You see the right, or capitalism, inventing, leading, being free to create and really get all wild about what it's going to do. Now, the characteristic of the individualist or evolutionary logical mind is also to not be so in tune or harmonized, kind of selfish. It's pushing towards evolution, and it's not really concerned so much with how we're designed, although it cannot, in the human brain, we cannot separate that. There's no articulated dynamics that differentiate one from the other. It's kind of one thing. But in the logical expression of political intellectuality, we are doing that. We have made it two separate things, and we're making them argue against each other as two symmetrically opposed political philosophies. So that's what's interesting, is that it seems that we're expressing in the physical world something that is inseparable in each one of us. And then when you look at the socialist or Marxist, emergence of, because it is an evolutionary step in political intellectuality. It is the brain for the human being human beings having become intelligent about social sciences, psychology, sociology, and for the first time exploring these subjects, these human sciences, and this producing, I don't know what, 150 years ago or so, the first thoughts that would apply these new understandings of the human collective in the sense of psychology and sociology to how we design our governments, how we distribute our resources, how we work as a society, who has authority. Because we started seeing something that before didn't bother us. We just thought that was the way it had to be. And all of a sudden we said, no, wait a second, we could make things so that it's no longer just the landlords and the kings and the whatever having all the power, and the mass of peasants just having been born to that predicament. The rise of socialism, Marxism, actually was an evolutionary step for humanity, where that part of the brain that is concerned for the collective, for others, so that children don't get trampled, so that people aren't living sick and ill or poverty, which we all do, actually. What speaks loudest is our individual selfishness, but there's what we call compassion, is actually something that is not conceptual. We just want to make sure that we're in the safe. But once we got all our ducks in a row and are secure and safe, we all will want to save those that are left behind. It's, how much it seems that the world is not about that, and we're all just selfish and leaving others behind who we don't care about, has to do with how this form of civilization has trained us and occupied our time to function and think and live. And so we never get to have the collective care of our intelligence and that part of our brain really manifest all that much, because we're really demanded upon fulfilling this other design of political life. But basically, we weren't able then to see what humanity was doing, that we were inventing, we were trying to take a leap in political intelligence and government design and try to see if we can come up with ways that are. And so obviously, what is more difficult and more trying in the sense of how to apply a higher intelligence to society will tend to fail, will tend to miss the mark on the first draft or the first ways. And then, of course, as human beings and our nature would have it, sometimes we'll obstinately insist that it has to be that way. And we have tried to forge Marxist and socialist systems that really don't work as effortlessly as what is actually a more primitive, centralized, selfish, individualist manners of politics, which is, just care about the self, get rich, 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 systems that make the people that are good at working numbers and good at working economics and good at bossing around in companies and industries, other people and the mechanisms of those, and who have some understanding of human nature succeed. And of course, that ability will be less in numbers. And so you get that pyramid again that we've always had in human history. So to actually go for the design of a civilization or a government that just really pushes on the top of that pyramid and somehow succeeds still in promoting initiative and creativity and freedom and independence and all the things that let us be the best that we can be, instead of through a pyramidical selfishness of sorts, to do it in a way that we're being the collective that we were designed by nature, is really a much more difficult attempt at designing something that works as well as what is easily and more selfishly, spontaneously designed by the human mind. And so we've never really had that attempt of an evolutionary step, that says, wait a second, let's try to do something better. Let's try to do something that distributes power and benefit to everybody more equally, succeed. We've never really have been able to design something yet that succeeds well with the most essential concepts. And instead what we've done is we've created a polarized fight that has given in to this tendency that I started this video with explaining, which is the human mind to try to immediately just create two camps, two teams. And then what you have is an impoverishment, making poor of society, because instead of focusing on study and education that continues to advance our understandings of human sciences and psychology, what we're doing is we're regressing from the harder endeavor and just saying, let's keep it simple. Let's just make two camps and justify. Then what people do is they end up justifying or explaining or condemning others in order to fulfill belonging to one camp or the other. And so people are no longer actually actively involved with the wholeness of what the human condition and the human species needs or is about. We become more about bossing other people or judging and condemning other people, and not really understanding things anymore. Polarization is totally destructive, and that's why today you open the internet and you hear a lot of people saying things that don't make sense. They're illogical. They looks like they're trying really hard to make their perspective or their camp or their team, work, be the right one. They're trying really hard to make, and they assume that because you're the other side, uh, that these and those are your problems. So they have a formula already figured out to the kinds of things the other side believes and why they're wrong, and what they don't understand. And the other ones kind of do the same. But in reality, what's fascinating is that if you leave all that, you hear that they're both the same human mind. One is more concerned with what I can do, and what I should be free to do, and the other one is more concerned with all those people who you're not including, who you're not. Now, what's interesting is that the left, the neo left, has gotten really involved in ways of logical constructs that have to do with sort of reinventing the gender, and all of a sudden forcing that to fit, really going against, which is the irony, because first green and ecological sciences understanding the wholeness of Gaia and how everything is already perfectly designed, and we just need to discover how everything is intermingling with how one thing is connected to the other, and how one thing affects and causes repercussions in other levels of the ecological design, and all that wonder of Gaia and ecology. Ironically, which would mean really getting to know better, getting to evolve the sciences of understanding how men and women complement each other, for example, in order to solve or fight, if you want, the problem, the social issue of feminism. In other words, bring on the virtues, the abilities of women to equalize her in her own right, in her own capacity, to males in civilization. Instead of taking a green or ecological understanding in feminism, it has been sort of a very logical kind of artificial construct of making women be just like men, in other words. And you see that in different ways, having them, a woman is about, nurturing, having babies, and there's this predisposition to be the protector of the offspring. And, anyways, but I don't want to get lost in that. We have, they have to bear arms, they have to be a soldier, they have to be like men, is basically what we're saying. And that has resulted in forcing each other to change the pronoun because of ideas that we have created in the past in order to substantiate this polarization in whatever subpolarization of whatever subject or topic we were talking about. And so ideas such as, I feel I was born a woman, says a 10-year-old boy. He got that from his parents, he got that from society. There's no way that a 10-year-old boy will be clear about, there's a lot of things that he may be feeling or wondering why he doesn't do the same as. But it's really us who, in our logical, precocious arrogance, have decided that it must be that it was meant to be the other's gender. And evolution really does not have that aim at all. Evolution is very clear about having two genders. There are other ways of understanding so many things that we have turned away from understanding, why there may be a softer version or a more aggressive version of the opposite gender, or why there may be less interest in sexuality, or why there may be a more interest in not being so defined by feeling like you don't really care to be so defined by your group, your gender group, and things that can be understood through nature and psychology. And we want to silence that. We want to no longer talk about childhood psychological development and how it affects his sexual self-perception, because we've forced ourselves to believe that you're either born, for some reason, nature or God decided that you are most optimally expressed for your entire life as the opposite gender. But somehow nature got it wrong and didn't realize that it really meant to make you a woman, or what, something that we have forced ourselves to conclude in order to make our gender ideologies fit. And what you now see is like women with these enormous muscles wanting men with, or no, women, or men or whatever that want to with these enormous muscles wanting to compete in women's swimming teams, and a whole bunch of stuff that is happening all over the West that are just amusing. Some people are just don't know what to think, because we've all been kind of, this is the way you got to think about it, instead of anybody making us aware that we've been veering off, veering off truth, veering off what can't be changed, what we should be learning better, how it is, how it's designed, how all these nuances and different things happen, and through understanding better how at smaller and smaller scales how nature designed us. We've decided to let our brain explain to us what we are, and that's possibly the worst mistake human beings can make, because our logical analytical brain is not really so concerned with what ultimately is healthiest for us. It will push to try to adapt to something new. It's that individual, selfish, logical, analytical part of the brain that perhaps is what's behind pushing evolution, but it certainly is not the optimal integral state of any living form collective, life form collective, which is what should be our, it's almost like saying, if every one of us was a teacher, and we had the little yardstick, to point on the blackboard. It's almost like saying that instead of keeping our mind and the awareness of us being who we are, in a living present sense of all our biological and awareness truths, we decide that wherever that stick goes is going to be what we need to do. It's like we've decided to let our logical, precocious, audacious, reckless, insolent, logical intelligence, which, sure, it comes up with great inventions that help us a great deal, because ultimately our logical intelligence will serve the collective evolution, is at a service, but it's not really the creator of the organism. It works for the organism. So we should also have that pointer serve the body, not us follow the pointer, which is what civilization has always kind of done. We trust our evolution too much, and our logical analytical intelligence, and we let it. We believe, that it can. We don't realize that it lives perpetually out of sync with a tendency to err us, to not do us justice, to not really understand how to keep us healthiest. We have always existed not having that awareness. So the best thing that humanity can do is to become aware that, yes, that is a wonderful tool that will someday bring paradise and get rid of all diseases and create wonderful systems of government that everybody will just be, living as organically as a single collective, as better than we could have ever have dreamed of. But it will always have that tendency to maybe get it wrong soon enough. Soon enough it will say, yeah, that's a great invention, but as soon as he came up with that idea, that logical intelligence of ours didn't realize that this whole group of people will be very far from accessing or being benefited by that invention. So if we always maintained awareness of that tendency, we would create the right world, a world that is true to our living organism. We have never done that, and that it should be what what a green, ecological, humanist political philosophy is about, which would include, of course, how to resolve the confrontational nature of humanity, no longer have wars, which they've always stayed away from because it's just too hot. You know, they don't know how to propose political solutions to resolve our differences or our problems in human nature, wanting to control others and or have what others have, and war. You know, green political philosophy has never really tried to tackle that. And by the same token, neither has green sort of left or what have you, progressive political thinking ever really focused on those original concepts it started off with 100 years ago. And I think that part of it has got to do with the fact that we have scared the West through years and years of messages and ways of explaining history and propaganda or political speeches, and just a constant march against our opposition, enemies, the Russians, the socialist Marxism, and to the point where literally sometimes you say something that makes all the sense in the world, you know, that and we have done some, you know, like free education for all children before university, you know, but they're always kind of, you're asking for it if you talk too much like that, you know, if you start saying, well, universities should be free for everybody and it should be based, you should succeed by merit, you know, if you study hard, you can finish in 5 years, but if you kind of want to work or you drag your feet or you're not very disciplined, it could take you 15 years or 10 years to get that degree because the standards are set, the requirements are set. And so you could propose an idea for university, and immediately, especially in America, you'll have people, oh, you're sounding like a communist. Where does that come from? That comes from 100 years of always drilling into it. So any kind of proposal will be met with that suggests any kind of collectivized concept that sounds collectivized will be met immediately by a subconscious resistance. That's what education, propagandist and messages and information education through generations does to our brain. It predisposes us subconsciously to reject things that start sounding a certain way, like it puts us on guard against certain things. It's terrible because really the pure original concepts of Marxism and socialism were about injustice. We're about bringing justice. We're about distributing equally all and good things. That's what humanity was trying to do. And of course, they started arguing and they started calling each other names and labeling, you know, capitalist. That is an example of how not to do things. And of course, the capitalist said, oh, well, so we are the enemy? No, you are the enemy. And boom, there you got the polarized fight that has kept us all entrenched against each other and not realizing, not letting us see that humanity as a whole was trying to take an evolutionary leap in politics. And so it would behoove us to, especially now with the explosion in communications, all of a sudden communications is really challenging the grip of authority and power, not because it wants to bring it down. That's the irony, that now they're looking for terrorists on the internet. No, what's happening is that when you have communications is freedom. Education, communications is basically seeing what we are, listening to the world, listening to itself for the first time. And let's do the metaphor of a family. For example, let's imagine that the parents were really strict. Every Sunday you go to church and you don't talk at the dinner table and you do your homework before you sit down to eat. And, you know, and so you imagine these kids, you know, growing up like that. Well, that's kind of what all countries before their government are government authority, and they have the power of sending the police down and killing people if they have to quash disorder, and so that has always been kind of the psychological or subconscious relationship between all peoples and the little governments that rule their countries. And so if you take that family and all of a sudden remove that pressure, remove all those rules, and you have them all just kind of passing pizza around and saying whatever they want, talk about whatever they want to talk about, what do you have? You have parents that also go, oh my God, they're threatening, they're threatening the order, my grip, my power, on their lives, my grip on the family, the way that I feel secure, through which I have run this family. That's not what those kids are trying to do. They're just for the first time expressing themselves. And sometimes it sounds rude, and sometimes it sounds confrontational. And you have all these things happening on the internet, which in reality is an expression of world liberation, in a sense. People are saying, hey, you know what? I don't like that Russia's being attacked. But if anybody said that, and they're the enemy, they're terrorists, shut them up, and so it's really tragic, actually, that we don't look at humanity as a whole in its evolutionary phases, and what our progress and our changing paradigm, or condition, predicament. It's always a predicament. As long as we keep killing each other, it's a predicament. Is about this new thing that is communications. Potentially could bring on, for the first time, easy, real democracy, where somehow everybody's thoughts get processed somehow, and you start extracting what will be new ideas that maybe, perhaps, government will see, oh, it wasn't so threatening after all. Look, it actually considers also our positions, because if you think about it, they're proposing that means that we would continue to be the ones that run the government. They're not trying to take our jobs away. They're just wanting us to do things differently, and they would relax, and they would let the world speak. And they would maybe value more even the most off-the-wall or hostile things that might be said. One thing I realized, and I'm just going to end with this, is that long time I realized once, that another of the very important good things that we could do is, as a humanity or as a family, at any scale that you want to look at this, is instead of trying to repress, immediately try to quash and overpower violence. It's funny because that's what's happening right now in the States with these horrible shootings. Instead of trying to bring more power into the situation to quash it, to step on it, to shut it up, to silence it, instead of rejecting violence, that we started thinking of violence not in terms of allowing it. So immediately that's something. What are you saying? To look at violence like the expression of discontent and criticism, like a protest. When it's a protest, sometimes we do that, but we still want to shut them up, don't we? We want to control protests only along the sidewalk in that park over there where nobody can see you. And we don't want to hear violence or protest. And when it's really like a country being fed up and invading, which is also the extreme form of violence, we just condemn it, and we don't realize that perhaps it is humanity saying, wait, the way we're doing things, what this world is doing to me, what the powers that be or authority or the system is doing to me is unbearable to my sense of free evolution, for me to fully express what I need to be as a living being, as a living entity, as an organic society is not allowing me to, and so you want to just break everything away from you because you're feeling constrained. And we kind of understand that concept when it comes to some wise parents, that when a kid throws a tantrum and breaks everything in the kitchen, they realize we're maybe not doing something right. We're doing something where, he's reacting, he's trying to, we say famously, he's asking for help, right? Well, as a world, we should do that to all forms of violence. But of course, that would require a lot of self acknowledgement and soul searching, and say, we have been going about Europe entirely wrong. We have been going about Russia. We have been going about Iran. We have been going about Latin America all wrong. We need to just, start from scratch and have a new, fresh outlook on the way we treat the world, we treat other countries, which is asking, like, I don't know, a nice Hollywood movie, I guess. But as a political thought, it's interesting to start looking at our problems, our violence, our confrontation as things, as alarms or signals that something is not being in civilization is not designed right. A system, a way of organizing our society and our political and the politics of our countries is not right because it's resulting. So, like, violence is not an evil thing. It's somebody asking to live freely. Something, it's a completely different way of looking at it. And it doesn't mean that we have to encourage violence or applaud it. It just means that we would be wiser and smarter about ourselves as a human species, and more intelligent about taking care of ourselves as a whole species. Okay, hope you enjoyed this and have a beautiful day. Ciao.